There it is. Good morning and welcome to Great Tree Zen Women's Temple. This morning's talk is about receiving and transmitting simultaneously. Sounds very interesting. But first, the opening sutra. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching. And now a brief message on dana. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word which means generosity, or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunity arises. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And Don Seido Wilkerson is a member of Charlotte Zen Center. Don, do you have a preference for dana this morning?
Yes, my preference would be that, all dana that people would like to give would go directly to Great Tree Zen Temple. We have a very small practice here in Charlotte, and actually we don't really need any support other than practice support and Dharma support. But if you have financial support you'd like to give, I would like to suggest that you give it to Great Tree Zen Temple.
Okay. Then go to greattreezentemple.org and follow the donate path. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our speaker this morning is Don Seido Wilkerson, who, as he says, sits with Charlotte Zen Meditation Center, where he has been a member for many years and now leads the practice. He was ordained a lay teacher by the abbess of Great Tree Zen Temple, the Reverend Teijo Munnich. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. And thank David for reminding me to turn my camera on. Even though I've been doing this Zoom now for a couple of years, ever since the pandemic started out, I'm still not really good at it. So I appreciate you letting me know that. I guess I should start. Can everyone see me and hear me at this point? Okay, thank you. I guess I'll start by just sort of reiterating what Laura was just saying, that, I appreciate the fact that everyone is gathered for a Dharma talk and that we're supporting the Dharma in that way. It is wonderful to do that, and that is your contribution. As I was saying a little earlier, our group in Charlotte is very small, and we don't own any property. We have no overhead, so to speak. So we don't have very much need for financial support. And so I'd rather any financial support go towards supporting Great Tree. So I'll try to remember to say that again at the end of my talk. So today's talk, I'd like to talk on the precepts in general, and specifically on the title as was mentioned, receiving and transmitting simultaneously. And I'm just going to be honest and say, when Teijo-san asked me to give a talk today, she asked for a title, of course. She suggested that I talk on the precepts. And so I came up with something very hurriedly and didn't know it at the time, but I gave myself a bit of a koan because I suggested, receiving and transmitting the precepts simultaneously. And I didn't exactly know what I meant by that when I gave her that title. So for the last week or so, I've been thinking about that. So we'll see how I do. It's a bit of a koan. I want to start by saying that there are, I guess there's 3 books that I've read and actually participated in some Dharma discussions with over the last, I guess, couple of 3 years or so, probably about since the pandemic started. There were 3 books that our group has read, and I think we read some of them with a reading group from Great Tree. But one of them is Living by Vow. I don't know if everybody can see that, but it's Living by Vow by Shohaku Akamura. And you can Google it and find out all the information you want to on that. Another book that I've read recently is Entering the Mind of Buddha by Reb Anderson. And it's Zen and the 6 Heroic Practices of Bodhisattvas, very much about the precepts and so forth. And the third book is Being Upright, also by Reb Anderson, which I have a copy here at the house, but I couldn't find it. But those 3 books have influenced my current understanding of the precepts quite a bit over the last couple of years. And most of my inspiration on understanding the precepts and wanting to follow them has come from those 3 books, my understanding of them. And I know my understanding will continue to change because that's just the very nature of the precepts. I'm going to start with one quote simply because it came up, maybe just a couple of weeks ago. Here in Charlotte, we're currently reading Thich Nhat Hanh's book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, which again is an excellent book. And just literally a couple of weeks ago, we were doing an evening Dharma discussion, and this particular quote came up, and I already knew that I'd be giving this talk. So when this quote came up, it was like perfect timing. So this is this is Thich Nhat Hanh. It's just like a little paragraph of what he was saying about the precepts. And he says, and I quote, "In many talks, the Buddha spoke about the threefold training of precepts, concentration, and insight. The practice of the precepts, Shila, is the practice of right mindfulness. If we don't practice the precepts, we aren't practicing mindfulness. I know some Zen students who think they can practice meditation without practicing precepts, but that is not correct. The heart of Buddhist meditation is the practice of mindfulness, and mindfulness is the practice of the precepts. You cannot meditate without practicing the precepts." So I thought that was just a good quote to kind of set the mood for what we're talking about on the precepts. They're not some secondary thing that we do as practitioners. They are right at the very heart of what we're doing. I would say if you're sitting and doing Zazen and you're sitting and being aware of the precepts, that's not something we typically do in Zazen. We just empty our mind and be completely without thought. But you could do worse if you were sitting and thinking about the precepts. But I think the attitude to have is to allow the precepts to permeate your thought and your experience at all times, whether it's during a period of Zazen or anytime during the day. We should always return to the spirit of the precepts. You don't have to have them memorized. You don't have to take them in quite such a literal way, but to always have that that spirit and that sense of intention that the precepts give us, I think is very important. So then comes that question of how do we practice them, and why did I say, practicing them simultaneously, both giving and receiving at the same time? And I know that sort of, I guess you could say unconsciously in the back of my mind when I gave Teijo-san that title, I was I was very much being influenced by these authors, by Shohak-san and by Reb Anderson, because throughout both of those books, or all three of those books, the spirit of the precepts is very much, that it should permeate every part of your practice. And it's not just something that we recite in a ceremony, which we do on occasion, but you should carry them in your everyday practice when you interact with people. And I'm not sure which book it was, and it could have even been a different book than those three, but I know sometime in the last year or two, when I've been doing reading and studying in some of our Dharma discussions, one of the authors talked about the word relationship and used that when talking about the precepts. And I wish I could find, that particular quotation. I looked for it and I just couldn't find what I remembered. But very much the intention and the spirit of what the person was talking about stuck with me. And I remember it, I can't find a specific quotation, but it was this whole idea of the precepts are, of course, very much living and very much dynamic in our lives. They're not static. They're not just what we see when we pick up a book or pick up a sutra card and look at it and just see, the three pure precepts, or the so-called 10 prohibitory precepts. They're not just that. It's the intention behind them, and it's also the involvement of the relationship between whoever is experiencing something in a moment. And I guess that's a little vague, but when you read any of the 16 Bodhisattva precepts, it implies, I guess, in a way, a relationship between subject and object, or one person and another, or maybe more than one person. And I think that's where the real value of the precepts come into play. That's where we really become aware of how important they are to practice them in our lives. It's been one of those things that I know Teijo-san has always emphasized over the years, that we have our practice, and when we literally sit on a cushion, we call that zazen, which is sitting practice, sitting zazen. But then there's the rest of our practice, which is, quite literally 24 hours a day. We're practicing Zen when we sleep. We're practicing Zen when we eat. And we're practicing Zen, in my case, as a layperson, all day long when I'm at work with the public and with other employees. When we're out in society, we're practicing Zen. The mindfulness that we cultivate sitting on the cushion, has its value when we get up off the cushion and when we start interacting with other beings. That's where you can begin to really see what I call the natural place that the precepts have in our lives. They're not just a ceremony, they are a way to help us maintain our mindfulness and improve on it. So I've been to several Jukai ceremonies. I'm sure others have too. And I do not have the liturgy in front of me of exactly the words spoken, but I'm pretty sure there's a part in there where we say to transmit is to receive, and to receive is to awaken, or something like that. Transmission and receiving are on the same ground, they're on the same level. In other words, you can't receive the precepts without also transmitting them, and you can't transmit them without also receiving them. And I think, we experience that in our daily lives when we interact with people. And I go back to that idea I mentioned a little bit earlier in one of these books I was reading, where they talk about relationship. Precepts don't exist or don't have any meaning if they're taken kind of in a flat, one-dimensional way, without consideration of more than one person being involved in a precept. And the precepts themselves pretty much point that out. When you just go down through and read the precepts, it's always something about the relationship of one being to another. And I think all beings benefit when someone follows the intentions of the precepts. And therefore, that's why I believe that they are so much a matter of a simultaneous experience. You may superficially feel like that you have invoked a precept and followed it when you've done something, or you may feel like you've followed it, or you may feel like you've sort of made it available to another person. But really, at the same time that person was receiving it, they were also transmitting it back to you. It's kind of a relationship thing, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think it's even possible to exercise a clear understanding of one of the precepts and be an example of it without the other person, so to speak, receiving that teaching from you, and you receive it back at the same time. So, I know that everybody is probably familiar with the precepts, so I'm going to take a few minutes, since we're talking about them, to just review the precepts a little bit and talk a little bit about them, so that it makes it a little more clear. And I've got them written down here on my other phone, if you'll forgive me for reading from it. We always start out with what are called the 3 pure precepts. And you can find a lot of different translations of it, but obviously the spirit behind it is so-called do good, avoid evil, or if you don't like the word evil, avoid conflict or avoid misunderstanding. And the third one is something like be present for other beings, or be supportive of other beings. So it's like the 3 pure precepts are to do good, avoid doing something that's problematic, and 3, support other beings. And as so many teachers of the precepts have always pointed out, if we're very mindful and we work at it, just following those 3 precepts is all we need. There's no need for any so-called prohibitory precepts if you follow those 3, because those 3 encompass all of the prohibitory precepts. So I guess the question that always comes up is, if those precepts are the three pure precepts are that clear and that accurate. Why do we need others, and why do we do it? And I think, it goes back to this question of relationship between beings. We all know that when you get two or more people together, the more people you get together, the greater probably the probability that there will be misunderstandings between people. And misunderstandings then lead to conflict, which can be small or big, but you just gradually get further and further away from what your original intention is if you don't have some guidance. So in my opinion, that's what the so-called prohibitory precepts are about. I think it's just an intention that developed over the years in monastic practice, where monks and fellow practitioners realized that they were going to have to be very specific about what was helpful and what is not helpful in daily life, what's liable to get you into conflict and what's liable to help you stay out of conflict. And so I just want to go through the 10 so-called prohibitory precepts quickly, just to remind us of all of them. And I'm going to make a few comments as I go along about how I feel about the intention of them and how they can be practiced in our everyday life. And of course, there's many, many translations of these, so you may be familiar with something different. But the first one is self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the everlasting Dharma, not giving rise to concepts of killing is called a precept of not killing. And, you can see that the way that has been written and translated and refined down through the years, they've left it pretty wide open so that you can apply it to a lot of things in life that come up, rather than just literally, so to speak, killing a person or killing an animal or killing something in the literal sense. I know in a lot of our discussions on precepts over the years, we've talked about, killing just means having a sense of violence about what you're doing and bringing something to an end in a kind of a violent or not very mindful way. That's the way to understand killing something. You can kill somebody's attitude, for example. You can kill their joy. You can kill their presence of mind. There's a lot of ways to be in violation of this precept. It's a very demanding precept because it requires us to be mindful and pay attention to the people who are around us. And I'm reminded of that little saying that I've seen, and I don't even know where I saw it, but I've seen it even recently, where it says, when you go to speak, ask yourself 3 questions before you say anything. And that is what I'm saying kind? Is what I'm saying helpful? And is what I'm saying necessary? And you ask yourself those 3 things before you say anything, and that will help you fulfill the intentions not only of the precept about speaking or speech, but actually all the precepts, really literally. Going on to the second precept, self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the unattainable Dharma, not having thoughts of gaining is called the precept of not stealing. And again, just like the first precept, it's very broad. It's asking us to look at our lives in each moment and not be so clinging to things. The Buddha taught us that when we hold on to things and we cling to things and try to make them our own, we cause suffering. And we cause suffering in ourselves and others. When you try to hold on to something and not share it and make it your own, you've separated it from somebody else, at least in theory, and sometimes literally, physically you have. And that's, of course, what stealing would be, is to take something that's literally belongs to somebody else, either a specific person or just belongs in general, not to you. To do so is to violate the sense of you're here to help other beings, not to take things for yourself and to cling to things. Third precept, self-nature is subtle and mysterious in the realm of the ungilded dharma. Not creating a veneer of attachment is called a precept of not misusing sex, which, forgive me because I'm reading this particular translation for the first time, but again, all these precepts begin to sound alike because they really are getting at the same intention. What is the intention in your mind? Are you selfish and clinging to something for yourself? Are you making yourself available to somebody else and trying to help them? Are you mindful, in other words? So misusing sexuality fits so well into this whole theme. If you do anything with a lack of mindfulness, you're going to just create misunderstanding, and misunderstanding is going to create conflict and problems. Next one is self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the inexplicable dharma, not preaching a single word is called a precept of not lying. And this goes back to what I was saying. Whenever you speak to another person, if you answer those three questions, you'll pretty much bring your mindfulness back to yourself. Is this necessary? Is this kind? And is it accurate? Self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the intrinsically pure dharma, not giving rise to delusions is called a precept of not giving or taking drugs. Again, certainly we human beings are great at delusions. So you can delude yourself in so many ways, including, our own Zen practice can be a delusion if we're not careful. The crude and very obvious and obvious delusions are when you resort to using alcohol or some kind of, something outside of yourself to try and please yourself or to try and numb the pain or whatever it is you're trying to do. We all know that ultimately those things don't work. They're not satisfying. And obviously they create conflict with the people around you. It's a delusion to think you're going to find satisfaction or stability in anything other than your own mind and your own practice. Anything other than that is going to be, at the very least, a subtle delusion, if not worse than subtle. Self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the flawless dharma, not expounding upon error is called a precept of not speaking of faults of others. Again, as far as I'm concerned, this sounds like all the other precepts. And if you live by the three pure precepts, this wouldn't be a problem. But if you work on your mindfulness when you encounter other people, I think you're naturally going to want to help them, and the number one thing you can do is listen, and just hear the other person and hear them completely. We're all familiar with that phrase that's out there, most people, excuse me, most people listen only because they're thinking about how they're going to respond to you. And that kind of listening is very complicated. It's kind of selfish. If you can truly unhook yourself and not be so aware of your own opinion of things and just really listen to the other person, you've done them a great service. You have been compassionate towards them, and you've had the right intention towards their life. I know it was, maybe it was in Thich Nhat Hanh's book that we're reading right now in our group, but he was talking about deep listening, I think a couple of chapters ago when we were reading about it, about how if we practice mindfully every day, and if we do nothing more than just, practice listening, deep listening to other people, it'll help transform them, but it'll also help transform you in the process. Another example of giving and receiving simultaneously. Self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the equitable Dharma, not dwelling upon I against you is called the precept of not praising yourself while abusing others. And that's just a continuation of what I was just talking about. If you let go of your own selfish, kind of egocentric view of things, then you're not going to be arrogant and self-righteous and try to tell other people the right way or show them the right way to do things. You're going to be more of a listener. And I think also you'll find less fault with other people. Finding fault with other people is usually not going to resolve conflict, and it's not really going to help the other person nearly as much as you believe it will. Usually, using very skillful language, you can help somebody see what they may be doing wrong and what they may be having difficulty with, and helping them to see it themselves is a whole lot better than you pointing it out to them. I think we've all learned that lesson in life. Self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the genuine, all-pervading Dharma, not being stingy about a single thing is called a precept of not sparing the Dharma assets. So this is obviously a big one for all of us who practice. I think it's a call to compassion, to practice mindfully, and when you're in the presence of other people, make a positive contribution or either just be quiet, but find a way to draw upon your awareness and your silence and your quietness, your mindfulness, and find a way to help other people find that within their own practice. And like I said earlier, if you can do it without being so direct about it, by allowing a person to have space so they can experience it rather than trying to so strongly transmit it to them, I guess is another way of saying it. Self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the selfless Dharma, not contriving reality for the self is called the precept of not indulging in anger. I know I certainly experience anger. I'm sure everyone does. So, I know Teijo-san has said many times in the past, always just kind of slow yourself down, take some deep breaths, bring yourself back to your mindfulness. And then if it's possible, which in the moment it may not be, but at some point, reflect on exactly what the trigger was for the anger. Because usually there's a trigger. Obviously, you're not likely to get angry if you're out in the woods in a very peaceful environment and everything's going wonderfully. It's always something that triggers it. So in your mindfulness, if you just very quietly reflect back and figure out what it was that triggered the anger and just study it, you don't have to resolve it. Sometimes it's not something that's going to get resolved, but just notice what it was that set you off and why. And the more you stay with that and don't turn away from it and just keep looking at it, the more you'll learn from it. You'll at least know what triggered it and why. And I think it usually obviously has to do with attachments. You've attached yourself to the idea that things need to be a certain way, and if they're not, it's going to upset you and make you angry if they're not a certain way. So you need to work on that attachment. Things are just not always going to be the way we want them to, obviously, and it's actually a good learning experience. Self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the one, not holding dualistic concepts of ordinary beings and sages is called the precept of not defaming the three treasures. So I suppose there's a lot of different levels and nuances to that. I'm going to look at it one more time. I can only tell you what it means to me and what thoughts come to me. I think the first thing that occurs to me is the realization that we all have that everyone has Buddha nature. And that has to be at the very core of our mindfulness when we interact with people. Naturally, coming from the precept just prior to that, the one about anger, we separate ourselves from other beings. We see ourselves as me and the other person as them. And, anger comes about. But we all know that in the ultimate sense, we have to be able to look at that other person and realize they have Buddha nature the same way we do. We may be angry at them. We may have something that has caused anger, I should say. But the ultimate truth is we have to deeply look at the situation and know that they have Buddha nature. I have Buddha nature. It is like this precept suggests, we're disparaging the teachings if we don't see our own Buddha nature and if we don't see the Buddha nature in other beings. To be mindful and to be respectful of that particular precept, that last precept, means that we have to be aware and vigilant about seeing our own Buddha nature and the Buddha nature of all other beings. When we separate ourselves from beings by that typical old standard of us and them, me and them, that's when conflict starts to arise. So that's the so-called prohibitory precepts. And I notice, I think Bodhidharma calls it the 10 precepts of the one mind, instead of calling it prohibitory. And I think that's great. I think we shouldn't refer to them as prohibitory precepts because I think it's a misunderstanding of the intention behind them. So I think we should refer to them as, the 10 precepts of the one mind. So I'm going to pause now and give everyone else a chance to speak. And I hope you will. You can speak on anything that I've talked about. You can ask questions or make comments, bring up other things to talk about, anything you'd like to do.
I found it interesting that you brought up Shoaku Okumura's book, Living by Vow, because when I first read that, I was reading the introduction where he said that vow is not a static thing. It's not a thing you do and then it just sits there. And to bring that to the precepts, it's their vows to aim your life at, and they're not static. They're things we work on. And it was interesting to see how you brought that all together with all your talk about the helping others and focusing on listening, because that's a very active thing. We think listening is static, but it's not. It's a very active thing, like a vow. And receiving the precepts is like vowing to transmit the precepts. It's like vowing to do the precepts, and it's all very active. And thank you for bringing that out and what you were talking about.
Thank you.
I also really appreciate
my own. Okay.
Go ahead, Renee.
Okay. I wanted to thank Don for saying that the negative formulation of the precepts can be confusing. When we look at the 3 pure precepts, 2 of them are positive. Do good and be beneficial to all beings. And once I was at Green Gulch at the temple, I was repeating the 10 precepts which had both the don't formulation and the do formulation. For instance, do not kill, but support life. Or do not lie, but stand up for truth, and so on, for all 10 precepts. And I think that's very important.
Yes.
Similar to what Lorna was saying, I really appreciate you talking about listening and the kind of transformative nature of listening, and what Lorna was saying, how it's in such an active process, and it's often regarded as, or maybe overlooked, but how beneficial it can be for ourselves and others to really listen and not just be kind of listening or waiting for our opportunity to jump in and say something, but really deeply listening and aiming to understand. That was really helpful the way you put it. And then talking about the precept of not killing and how expansive that can be, not just talking about human life or animal life, but the way we kill ideas or joy. I forget everything you said, but that really sparked something for me too, the way we can, kill others' joy and our own joy. That was really on point for me. So I appreciate the way you expanded that precept. That was very helpful.
Thank you for the teachings. It is really helpful right now. I'm in my personal life. I'm struggling with an addiction, and I stepped away from participating with Great Tree and also another group because I I felt like I was being an imposter, that I could not say the precept of abstaining from substances to find a way to cope with something that really is within myself. And so it's been interesting for me to come back around and thinking that was kind of like the opposite of what I needed to do. I didn't need to step away because I felt like I wasn't truthful in being able to recite the precepts, but I need to be in community and with the Sangha even more, as opposed to staying away. And so thank you. This has been helpful, and again, reinforcing, we just keep trying. And so that's kind of where I feel like I am. I'll just keep trying. Thank you.
Well, so as someone just said a moment ago, the precepts are very dynamic, and I hope I managed to say that and got that point across, because they are not static. And no one who's human ever completely fulfills the precepts. I mean, I'm not even sure that that's possible, or even something we should see. It's a process of refinement, just like doing your zazen. You just do it, and you're aware of these precepts, but you don't have to have a judgment about them, like, oh, I fulfilled that precept, or oh, I didn't. Just be aware of them, and they will subtly influence your life in a subtle way, just because they're there. And you don't have to be so keenly aware of whether you're fulfilling or not fulfilling a particular precept. Just be aware of the intention of them and your intention to try and follow them.
I find it to be ironic in my pulling away, and yet when there's not a local group, I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia, but have been zooming in with you guys now for a while, and when I went to search for a way of kind of dealing with the addiction, that within 5 miles of my house, there is a recovery Dharma group that meets.
Wow.
Every week. So it's like there's not a Buddhist group around here, but there's a recovery Dharma group. Now tell me if that's not, I was like, okay, you put out what you need, and it's received. So that's my example of transmission and receiving. So I thought that was a pretty incredible. I don't call it a coincidence, but it, yeah. So that was, I'm holding to that one of what you transmit, you'll receive. So I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just say that Zen is a very social and communal practice. It's not the practice that some people think it is when they only read something in a book. Zen can come off seeming very, ascetic-like and all about meditation and so forth. But when you actually join a Sangha which I hope you can do, even if it's just by way of Zoom, you will find out that Zen is very much a practice of community, very much a practice of support from other beings. The Buddha didn't intend us to go it alone. You have Buddha nature, but so does everybody else. And sharing that realization between people is our practice.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing with us your experience. I take what you said. The way I think of it is the three jewels: taking refuge in Buddha, taking refuge in Dharma, taking refuge in Sangha. And I think that you have discovered that those three jewels are really the basis for a good way to live the precepts. And getting back to what Don was talking about in terms of giving and receiving, I see it as eliminating a duality between people. If you're giving precepts, you're also receiving them because you reduce the duality of the situation by doing that.
And I think it expresses the interdependence of everything. There is no separation. We think there's a separation between us. We think there's a separation between things. There isn't. We're all connected. We're all of the same breath, the same thoughts, and the same being. And there is no separation between us.
I just want to say that it's very comforting and very reassuring to hear everybody's comments, actually, all the comments that you guys have made since I ended my talk. It's very nice to hear the comments. Seriously, I am a lay person and I'm not very experienced at giving Dharma talks, so I always get very nervous, and there's always this feeling like the Dharma is so serious that I really, really want to give a good accounting for it, so to speak. I really want to give a good Dharma talk. And, I feel the pressure of wanting to be really good at it, and I don't feel like I am, but, it's all a process, and it's all dynamic, and it's all moving. But your comments have all been very good. I appreciate them very much.
I really appreciate you speaking, Don, and bringing in the precepts and your the way you expanded upon them. Yeah, it was really helpful, and I can definitely relate to the nervousness, even just like when I'm not the one giving a talk, I feel a little sense of nervousness just speaking. So I understand the heightened nervousness, and you showing up anyway and sharing is really super helpful and inspiring. And I'll say, Lisa, when you were speaking too, what I was reminded of was I was listening to a talk by Rev Anderson on the precepts, and he was talking about the 10 prohibitory precepts, or I forget how you put it, Don, but the 10 precepts of one mind. Is that correct? Yeah, I like that a lot. But the 10 precepts of one mind. And he was talking about, well, when we uphold the precepts, there's great compassion there. Upholding the precepts is an act of and a cause for compassion. And then he went on And he said, when we break the precepts, and there was a long pause, and I was like, uh-oh, what's he gonna say? What happens when we break the precepts? And he said, when we break the precepts, that's also a cause for great compassion. And I was like, oh, phew. And then I was like, yeah, that's true. I definitely, I can be really hard on myself when I feel like I'm falling short, and when I do something that I feel or I think is not in alignment with what the precepts ask us to do, which one is my own kind of limited understanding of them. And two, I think further gets me away from the precepts when I'm just judging myself and punishing myself versus holding myself and others with compassion as a way to return. So those were some thoughts that you brought up for me.
Yeah, we will all definitely break precepts. It's just pretty much unavoidable. So seeing it as a process that continues on and really never ends is the important thing. And you just like doing your Zazen, you just keep doing it. You don't question it. You don't think, oh, I'm doing really well, or oh, I'm doing very poorly. You just do it. And when you break a precept, you just learn from it and keep moving. And that's really what you just said.
Well, we're approaching the end of our time together, unless someone else has something to say. I thank you all for coming, and especially for you, Don, sharing your understanding of the Dharma with us and helping us to improve our understanding of the Dharma. And let us all concentrate on compassion for ourselves. And that will be a transmission to others of compassion. Thank you all, and have a good day.
Thank you.